Hello everyone, and thanks for tuning in. We shall be with you shortly. That's guaranteed to get to number 1, I reckon, Ronnie. Eventually,
I think it will be if you play it enough. It gets me doing that. You see.
I know, yeah. A bit of a playboy.
And that's why I got no hair. It's all falling out with me doing that all the time.
All right. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Right, everyone. So welcome along, and this is number 2 of a brand new show, as some of you will know, and. Now, we're going to ask you in a few minutes about the fact that we're doing an experiment with Vegan, of course, in the sense that we're streaming to a lot more places. So I'm going to kind of go through where they are. And so should you wish to, you could maybe kind of just, check whether we're actually on air or not, because I am on my YouTube, but I'm not quite sure. What about you, Ronnie? I
don't think it's doing it on mine, on my Facebook. Okay. Hopefully next week we'll have sorted it out so it does. Yeah. I mean, I will share it on there afterwards, and I do share it around a lot of different vegan and animal rights groups on Facebook as well.
So we've got Sky Morgan in the house. Jack, I don't know where Jack's gone, but we've got Sky Morgan. All right. Okay. So we're on my Facebook. That's good. Yeah. So Ulf, hello, and the spiritual vegan. Who's that? Okay. So we're going to be talking about the grassroots. Now, I suppose for most of our career, to put it that way, Ronnie, we've been in the grassroots, haven't we? Really, I suppose most of the time.
I think probably for all of my career, I've been in the grassroots. I've never been paid by. The only people that have paid me to do any kind of animal liberation activities are the government, to be quite honest, where I was receiving benefits, and while receiving benefits, spent my time as an activist. So the government paid me to do activism, which quite rightly they should, seeing as they put so much money into.
We're supposed to be echoing here. Have you got your echo cancellation on there, Ron?
I shall have a look.
Only when Roger talks. Well, I've got my echo cancellation on.
I'll just have a quick look. Yes, it's on. Okay. What I'll do is if I turn down your volume, that may work. That might be better. Yeah. How's that now?
I even don't know what happened there. Yeah, anyway, we were saying that most of the time we've been in the grassroots. Now, in terms of where we're streaming to my YouTube, that's on. I think we're streaming to my Twitter. We're streaming to Skyjack Morgan's Twitter. Then we're on Vegan, of course, YouTube. And then we're on a Facebook page called The Vegan Review. And then we're on Vegan, of course, Facebook, Ronnie's Facebook, and my Facebook.
Yeah, so, well, hopefully I'm not sure that it's on my Facebook at the moment, but hopefully it will be next week.
Yeah, we'll see. Yeah. So this is a kind of new kind of thing here, really, but it's an interesting one. Hi, Deb. Hi, Canadian Vegan Forever. As long as that. So what we're going to do, first of all, is just kind of define for ourselves and everybody else, really, this idea of what the grassroots might be, because obviously we need to kind of define it probably. And so we've just got 3 or 4, really. Something grassroots is at the most basic level of something down there in the dirt. Interesting phrase. With the roots of an idea of activity. You're always down there in the dirt, aren't you?
I'm always down there in the dirt, Roger. Yeah, so definitely grassroots.
If you're looking to make a change from the ground up, start at the grassroots. So that's kind of obvious away. And then you've got the most basic level of activity or organization. Ordinary people regarded as the main body of an organization's membership. And then you've got the ordinary people as distinct from the active leadership of a party. So this is a political one. And then this one, I quite like this last one, really. The grassroots of an organization or movement are the ordinary people who form the main part of it rather than its leaders. And Ronnie, we were saying before that we thought it might be something to do with payment as well, in the sense that the grassroots tend to be unpaid volunteers, and the leadership or prime movers tend to be waged. So that's another distinction, I suppose, right?
Yeah, the vast majority of activists in any movement are unpaid, aren't they? Because you couldn't never pay every single person that is involved in activism. Yeah.
So obviously, the HSA, that's grassroots, and it's always been. I mean, have they paid people? The HSA?
Not as far as I know. I don't know about today. Certainly, when I was involved in the HSA, I mean, the HSA began in the 60s in England and kind of spread throughout the UK. I think it maybe spread throughout the world. I think there's probably hunt subs in other countries where that kind of type of hunting takes place. Back in the day, I mean, I was on the HSA committee at one stage in the 1970s, and we certainly weren't paid. And the people on the committee weren't paid. We were all volunteers, and certainly the activists are volunteers. As far as I know, no one's paid in the hunt subs. Yeah, and so it's the same with me. In the 80s, I knew a couple of people who were on the HSA committee, and they weren't paid. I was on the BWV committee, and it was expenses only in terms of that. And I remember feeling very guilty about. I think at the time, it's 1982. I think I put in a thing for something like, I think it might be £13.50 or something, and I always felt really terribly guilty, you know. And one reason for that is that we were doing stalls in Liverpool, and this old age pensioner came up fairly regularly, but not every week, and she would always kind of give you a quid into the box, and I suppose that must have been quite a lot for her. And then she'd come back, 2 or 3 weeks later and go, "Oh, is this still happening? Isn't it terrible?" kind of thing, and give you another one. And I was thinking, well, blimey, that's like 13 little old ladies with their pound coins, you know. So I was always very conscious of taking the money in that sense. Yeah.
Go ahead, young man.
Oh yeah. I mean, I've always found that sometimes, kind of when doing street stores where we were raising money, which I used to do years ago, that often in the poorest areas you got the more donations sometimes, where a lot of people would give a quid or something, and it would add up, and that was that would really be quite a lot of money to those people.
Yeah, I think academic research backs that up as well. The fact that there seems to be data that people donate more, at least in terms of percentage of their income. You get much more of it from people who are not that well off.
Well, rich people are mean. That's why they're rich, isn't it? Because they keep all the money for themselves.
Rich people are careful.
yeah. That is a word, another word for it, I suppose. If you want to be polite to them.
Indeed.
Yeah.
So we were thinking about, well, in terms of our experience of the grassroots, then it's in the past and now in the present. I mean, I'm very lucky, really, because being based in Ireland, there isn't anything besides the grassroots here, and I think that might actually be a pretty unique situation, because I mean there are some kind of ICABs, which are a kind of like Irish version of the League Against Cruel Sports, but I think there's like one person involved and it's not very active. And there is an anti-vivisection thing, which I think was kind of cast off from maybe the NAVs. And I think there might be one person, but again, hardly anybody does anything. So if the press want to go anywhere, they go to the active groups, and all the active groups are grassroots, which is great from my point of view, because they tend not to, as it were, be subservient to the national groups, which is an important thing for me myself. But it's where the action is, really, the grassroots, I think, don't you, Ronnie?
It kind of is, and I think there's a big historical difference, say, between Ireland and England, or possibly the rest of the UK as well, and and other countries as well, maybe the US, where in those other countries, like kind of including the UK, there'd been these long-standing national organisations that go back decades and decades, even before the rise of what might be called the animal rights movement. These organisations were there, and maybe that wasn't really the case in Ireland for some reason.
Yeah, I think that's right, in the sense that, well, there's the ISPCA, which is the Irish counterpart to the RSPCA, but I'm not quite sure. I used to give a talk where I used to go down all the organizations, and all the British ones were much earlier, so
Yeah.
it is right. And then a lot of the Irish ones kind of model themselves on the British ones as well. So there was one group in Ireland which is inactive now. They kind of model themselves on Peter. And it's interesting because when I came over to Ireland, it was 2005, I kind of went around all the people who were associated with groups and interviewed them, because I was going to do an academic paper. Never materialized in the end. But there was only one person in this kind of Peter clone group that said that they want, well, he actually said he wanted to be the leader of the animal rights movement in Ireland. and he wanted to be paid, and he had this kind of careerist mindset and everything. But nobody else in Ireland did. They were much more DIY kind of politics, and most of them, made their own leaflets as well. And so it's not as though there's lots and lots of people coming over from leaflets and that coming over from Britain, which again I think is a pretty kind of good thing. This organization called the Animal Liberation Front, Ronnie, you know a bit about that, don't you?
A little bit, yeah.
That was
allegedly I do.
Wasn't it?
Well, I mean, another examples of a totally grassroots organization, I suppose. They think it could be called an organization. Once again, nobody was paid in the ALF, and it really mainly consisted of just people, forming groups in their own local area and getting active. It was, a very loose structure, really decentralized, and so a very good example, I think, of a kind of grassroots, a grassroots group, grassroots activity. Yeah,
the LF, because I was looking up some academic studies about the grassroots in the last week, and some really interesting stuff. Some analysis of, say, the Occupy movement, which seems to have been and gone now, which is interesting. I suppose you might say Extinction Rebellion have replaced them, perhaps, in the sense that, I mean, it's not the same thing, obviously, but I mean, it was all to do with the power of corporations, the kind of the power elite of the world kind of using up far too much of resources and this kind of stuff. But I know that radical academics like David Nybert, they were very hopeful when the Occupy movement started. But again, that was a very well. The reason that I mention it is the fact that one of these papers I looked at was talking about leaderless movements, and I suppose the ALF was a little bit like that, in the sense that there wasn't a leadership, right?
No, because it kind of wasn't. I mean, there are people within the ALF who were instigators, and I think at a local level, it could be argued that there possibly may have been some kind of leadership at local level, and certainly that there were people at local level that kind of we call planners, who were the people that kind of planned and organised the actions. And then there were a lot of other people that didn't want to be involved in that. They just wanted to be called upon to do the action. And so you kind of had that distinction. There was a sense in which the planners could be called leaders, but they weren't kind of...
well, what this paper said, which is dead on what you've just said, this paper said that we found that these organizations were leaderless, but they weren't leadership-less. So it's the fact that there were people taking leadership roles, but they weren't, and so it was all to do with, again, prime movers, but also I think it's to do with trying to share out responsibility and to delegate and, do things on a rota basis, all of which are really kind of great and democratic, but it's one of the things that, of course, if there was a representative here of the non-grassroots, they'd be saying the problem with the grassroots is the fact that it's not stable and it's not a kind of solid base. You know, I mean, I remember when the idea of the Federation of Local Animal Rights Groups started in the 1980s, one of the main worries for people was that, well, if we left it to the grassroots and there was no BOAV and there was no PETA, my attitude was, I imagine there'd be more stuff going on, but they assumed that there'd be less stuff going on because there'd be no organizers left, because you won't get organizers if you don't pay them.
I think, yeah, I think it's kind of to do in terms of whether stuff happens or not. It's kind of really to do. It is to do with organisers, but also with people who are instigators as well. And you can have instigators at different levels. You have instigators at like a kind of local level, or even at regional and national levels. You know, somebody that, you know, kind of pushes an idea and encourages other people to kind of get involved with that. And those people don't necessarily have to be paid in order to do that. But it's a question of time, really, that if someone has to devote a lot of their time to earning a wage, going out to work, they've got less time, you know, for the kind of animal liberation activities. They've got less time for the organising and the instigating. So that's where paying people would come in handy. It would free up their time to do that. And I'm kind of not opposed to that, especially in the climate today, kind of hearing.
Oh yeah, me too. I'm not opposed to it.
Yeah.
Interesting question from that though, Ronnie, is that, say for example, I mean, if it was the age of the internet when the ALF was at its peak, kind of, let's say in the mid 80s or something, I wonder what the world would look like. I mean, it might be a scarier place because you don't know what people would have done online in terms of being a security risk. But say there was the kind of patron type of system going. Now that would have been a great way of funding individual cells if you could manage to set one up securely, wouldn't it?
Yeah. Although I think that the kind of the sort of main block to the ALF not expanding more than it did, or not being more active than it did, wasn't to do with money. It was to do with people's willingness to become involved, and also the willingness of existing groups to recruit more people.
Yeah.
That, to me, that was that was what really limited activity more than money, because a lot of the stuff that the ALF did didn't really cost very much. It was really quite, like going somewhere and causing a bit of damage. It can be done, can be done very cheaply. The animal rescue was more expensive because it involved hiring vehicles often and a lot more people, and looking after the animals afterwards, and that required that would have required more funding.
Finding the homes.
But it was
the
main problem. I felt the main limitation on activity wasn't really. I mean, more money would have helped, but that wasn't. Lack of money wasn't the main limitation.
No, well, I suppose you could say that's the case with, say, the VIP. I mean, it's useful to have something coming in, so I know that I can pay the insurance on the van and that kind of stuff. But it's not as though, and obviously, if somebody's in the group wanted to, well, what about this range of T-shirts and stuff? It's really nice to have that kind of secure thing where you could, if you like, give people their head when it came to their ideas. There's nothing more demoralizing and kind of, oh, this would be a good idea and this would be a good idea, and what if we had this? And then you go, oh yeah, but we can't afford it, or it'll take us a year to get it. So I understand that money isn't everything, but it is something, and it's important, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, I think if there was more money at the grassroots, more could be achieved. But the main problem isn't lack of money. The main problem is a lack of people prepared to be active. That's the overriding
the perpetual problem.
Yes, yeah,
that's
right.
Problem.
Yeah. And I mean, and for someone to kind of become an activist and do stuff doesn't necessarily cost a great deal of money. So it's how do we solve that problem of getting more people to be active? That's the number one. That's the billion.
I mean, even if
dollar
you were to,
question.
I mean, that was well, I mean, to move it to the present a little bit, because I was thinking that, well, it's something like AV, a grassroots group, and I think it kind of is, and it isn't, because it's got a kind of corporatized kind of head part of it, and then the bit on the actual people who do the talking and the holding the laptops, they're grassroots people. And although there are some regional people, I believe, that get paid and stuff, and so it's a bit of a hybrid, I think. And so the interesting thing about that is that there seems to be a rise in the last year, maybe 18 months, of people kind of moving away from that organizational structure, but keeping the idea. So you got We the Free and all that. And I think
I think there are people that run We the Free that are on a wage. I don't think it's a.
Oh, are they? Okay.
Yeah, I don't think it's a massive. I don't think they're like kind of on a massive amount, but because they're kind of full time and that's their, and that's kind of what they're doing all the time. I kind of think that's fair enough.
Well, I do. This is what I'm saying. Is if the Patreon system. See, it seems to me that if the Patreon system worked better than it does, is that you would get people put themselves forward as organizers, and then people would, if they liked the idea, would support it. And the great thing about it, which is not the same with the national groups, is the fact that you can monitor what they're doing, because they're going to be all over social media, and so therefore, if your money seems to have gone missing, as it were, then you just don't donate again. And if so it seems to be a much more democratic thing. But I'm not opposed to people being paid, and I'm certainly not opposed to people who can't be active supporting the activists. In fact, I think that's a great model of a successful movement, because but it just seems to me that that if the Patreon system was geared up to, as it were, fund lots and lots and lots of different groups rather than a few individuals, I think that would probably be a bit more successful than it is now, I would think.
Yeah.
But again, it still doesn't mean that people would automatically come forward as the organizers.
No, and I think it's a difficulty. I think if there were funds to pay people to operate full time, or even just be able to spend a lot more time instigating activity, and for me that in a sense the most important activity really would be vegan outreach. I'd like to see kind of people at a regional level who are actually funded to actually set up active groups in different places, and to have a really hands-on approach to that, to go along, show people what to do, get them going, give them.
To be fair, the BUAV tried to do that, didn't they? Like before the show, we were talking. We know a couple of people who were their kind of local group campaign officer, I think they were called, and their kind of job was to try and do that. There's even talk. I mean, this is before the internet age. There's even talk of them getting themselves a kind of bus and deck it out like a kind of mobile resource center. And so the idea would be to go to an area and kind of, see if you can get a meeting together of all the people involved in all the different groups and say, okay, well, do you fancy organizing on a local level? And if so, what do you need? We might have it, kind of thing. And almost that act as a kickstart to that.
Yeah, because I think this, this is the major trouble. I mean, to me, kind of local activism and very localized activism is like the really key to the achievement of animal liberation, because that's the way you kind of educate the most people. If you're kind of active at a community level, say in kind of spreading the vegan message, you can reach more people. That kind of doesn't happen really at the moment. Most activism takes place in the center of big cities, and that's great. I think this is brilliant that takes place, but it kind of needs to be to be everywhere. And I've said this like probably a million times before.
Yeah.
And I carry on saying
your mantra.
my mantra, because I think
it's your gravestone.
Because if
you're
look,
not vegan, go vegan.
Yeah,
if you are vegan, become active. And if you're active, become an organizer.
If we're going to change politics, you see, now like individual change and people changing as individuals, can make a big difference. Like for everyone, here in England, for instance, who consumes animal products, you could say that's over 100 animals slaughtered every year, or they create a demand for over 100 animals to be slaughtered every year. So changing people as individuals, getting people to become vegan as individuals is like important, to reduce that demand. But also in terms of the way people behave politically, so eventually we can get more vegan politicians, more people to vote for them, and you can totally change the administration, so we can get legislation to rapidly move us in the right direction. But where do those members of parliament come from? Those members of parliament come from local areas. They come from local constituency, and I think there's a kind of, in a sense, almost a myth that power is centered in, here in the UK, power is centered in London, and that everyone goes to London and does all these big demos and stuff.
I thought they all came from Boris Johnson breeding.
Well, I think probably we're not going to get him again, it seems now. There was a danger of that, wasn't it? Not that any of them are any good, of course, the Tories, but there we are. Yeah, it's, and people think London is centre of power, but it's kind of not. Power comes from the constituencies, because it's those members of parliament that are elected in the constituency. I think it's the same, all around the world. It's the same in the USA, where you get representatives elected locally that go to, whatever legislative forum there is. Like here, it's, here in the UK, it's like Westminster, isn't it? Parliament. But
you think that people would start on the council level, though, wouldn't they? Right?
Well, local authorities. Yes, it's really important to get the right people elected to local authorities. But the power of local authorities is kind of fairly limited, and the majority of the finances, certainly here in the UK, the majority of finances for the local authorities comes from the governments. And one of the problems we've got here is that the government has slashed funding to local authorities. So local authorities are like, they're kind of really limited in if they want to do something like good in terms of protecting the environment or something like that, and it costs money. They can't do it because the government has cut the funding, and so that's a kind of a problem for local authorities that arises because of the nature of the government. You'd have to change the government in order to deal with that. And so who you elect as member of parliament, and what that person's views are, is like massively important, because and they come from local areas. So local activism, this is why local activism is so vitally important. So you change the culture of a local area, you change the culture of a kind of constituency, so that isn't only just reflected in changes people's lifestyle was having an effect, but also changes how they behave.
The one thing will follow the other, won't it, Ronnie? I mean, like, if you can bring about cultural change, and if we can do something about cultural speciesism, then all the laws and the legislators and the politicians, they will kind of flow through. It's almost as though we just don't have that infrastructure to even start that process at the moment.
We don't deal with things. They're talking about the grassroots and it being at a basic level. Is we're not good in the movement at kind of dealing with things at a kind of grassroots level, which if you're going to create fundamental change, you kind of have to deal with things at a grassroots level, because you have to change the way a large number of ordinary people think. You have to change the attitudes of a large number of ordinary people, and that can kind of only be done at a grassroots level through interaction with those people. And we tend to not, we never go to the basics, like the basic foundation of things. Like, the movement seems to be always kind of hitting at a level above that, and not dealing with the fundamental problem, which is like the attitudes of ordinary people. And that can only be changed through like grassroots activity.
And yeah, I'm agreeing with you here, and it makes me think about the overall shape and the structure of the movement. And I think it's a little bit odd because the way that the movement has been set up, to the extent that it's been set up, I mean, it's obviously evolved and grown and all that and developed. It's not conducive for what exactly you're talking about, unfortunately, because you kind of need a lot of people. You kind of need a lot of people organizing all over the place, rather than being kind of sucked into the centers and to create kind of power centers. You know, you don't need that in our kind of movement.
Yeah, it's a lot of the stuff is aimed at like kind of let's do this activity that will pressurize the governments. You know, let's do this expose and give us a big load of money so we can do this expose, and then we'll pressurize the government and show them, you know, look at this terrible place, this terrible farm, and, you know, laws need to change and that. But you see, to me, that's hitting too high, because, you know, if you've got a government that's got like kind of ideologically speciesist, and ideologically opposed to, you know, giving animals rights, ideologically opposed to even giving animals, you know, the smallest level of protection, you're kind of pretty much banging your head. Whatever you do, you're banging your head against a brick wall. You see, so you have to deal with the problem at a more fundamental level. You've got to change the very nature of the government, and you only do that by changing ordinary people, so that we can get, you know, eventually get a decent government voted in that kind of will be amenable to create these changes.
There's a bit of a conundrum in my head that I wanted to talk to today, focused on the grassroots, which is that before the internet, when you had people like Neil Lee and the Ark News and the Animal Rights Coalition, which is where it got its name from, even though it was before the internet, it seemed that our movement was more kind of networky or more organized in some way than it is now. I mean, it sounds as though that's impossible. It seemed to be, because everybody seemed to, I don't know, it was a central place to get information, and the coordination was pretty good pre-internet, and yet we seem to have difficulty getting things done even in the internet age. It's a mystery to me.
Yeah, I think sadly that you know, that although there are a lot more people these days that kind of that call themselves vegan, and you know, the ways of communicating are so much better. In those days, you kind of I remember if you know, most activity was organized through kind of newsletters and stuff like that. Like Ark News used to, you know, there was information in Ark News about demonstrations and, you know, various events that people could attend, and that came out about once a month. So you had to have things had to be organized quite well in advance, you know, for people to be able to go to them. But if there was something urgent, there were what was called telephone trees. You know, say there was going to be an urgent action, an urgent demonstration. Then what would happen is, you know, one person would phone three people, and those three people would each phone three other people, and that's how you know, how we spread information about stuff that was kind of, you know, where there wasn't time to kind of put it in, you know, a publication that got sent out to people. But like the level of activities is not kind of, despite the fact that we've kind of got a lot more vegans, and despite the fact that you know, organizing and communicating information about activities is so much easier today, that hasn't been matched really by an increase in activism.
So yeah, it remains a bit of a, because you'd have thought, I mean, like, what better tool than the internet to be able to organize the grassroots of a social movement, because it's instant global communication.
But I think it's double-edged sword. You see, if you look at social media, it's double-edged sword, because it does provide a great tool for organizing stuff and you know, communicating information about activities. But also it gives people an excuse to kind of, you know, spend all their time on social media thinking they're doing something when they're kind of not really. You know, all these online petitions. People think, oh, I've signed 20 petitions a day, like, I've done my bit of activism, and that, when really they should realise that kind of almost all petitions don't achieve anything. That's just one example, and people constantly on social media, constantly commenting on things, constantly watching videos like this one. Now, what I'm saying to people is, don't watch this video and then think, great, I've done my bit of activism now. I've watched Ronnie and Roger.
Turn off now. Why are you still watching?
Whatever it is, right?
Go away.
And don't think that you've done your activism watching this video. You haven't. It don't matter how many videos you watch. It don't change jack shit. Right, the only thing that changes things is getting out there, getting active, educating people to go vegan, or kind of, doing something to promote animal liberation, whatever way you can. That's the only thing that changes things. Reading stuff, watching stuff, and commenting on stuff. None of that changes anything. It's activism. So, like, if doing these chats doesn't make anyone active, then I've kind of wasted an hour of my time, and so's Roger. You know what I mean? The fundamental idea.
I'm going to change the name of this to Ronnie's Rants.
The reason I'm on here, the reason I've come on, done this thing with Roger, is in order to encourage more activism. Because we want animal liberation, we ain't going to get it kind of just sat like at a computer screen. That can be part of it.
Ironically, right, is that we probably don't want to go here, and certainly not for too long, but that's what got you into hot water with regard to vegan camp out, because you were thinking, well, look, there's 15,000 vegans all together. What a great way to network and connect on an activist level, and that was rejected as an idea.
Yeah. I don't, yes, there is an activist, there was an activist tent there, and I think, I think some good activism did come out of camp out. I kind of want to give them their due in that respect, but I kind of think it could have been a lot more. I think it could have been activism focused rather than social focused, and have a bit of social in it as well. Great, there's no harm in that. I think the best form of activism is when you do a bit of activism, and then afterwards you go in the vegan cafe or whatever and have a bit of a social. Like combine the two. And to me, that camp out or really any kind of social event, there should be like an active element in it, because for all vegans, why are we vegan? If we're genuine vegans, we're genuine vegans because we believe in animal liberation. Well, we're not going to get animal liberation if like the vast majority of people don't believe in it. So if we want to achieve what we ourselves believe in, if we want to achieve the thing for which we've changed our own lives, you've got to change other people, and you can only do that through activism.
Now, one thing that we were both involved in was these kind of efforts in the early 80s to radicalize various groups, even traditional animal welfare groups like the RSPCA. The RSPCA have got an interesting history in terms of radicalism and militancy, and I know we're going to do a show on the distinction between those two ideas.
Yes.
But by the time we get to the 80s, they were full of hunters. The Queen was the patron, even though she was wringing pheasants' necks and this kind of stuff. And so there was an effort to try to radicalize the RSPCA, but the one that succeeded, that everybody kind of possibly knows about, is the BUAV. Yeah, and I suppose really that's one job of the. Seems to me that the grassroots is one place that can keep the rest of the movement, if you like, on its moral toes, and act as a kind of corrective to kind of flabbiness and all that. And do you think there's any need to do another kind of BUAV type thing, or was that just a one-off?
I think it depends on what's the best use of our energy. I mean, going back to the RSPCA, basically what happened was the RSPCA, way back, kind of during the 1970s and before the 1970s, they weren't opposed to hunting, and there were hunters on their ruling council.
The place was full of hunters.
Yeah, full of hunters. And so all the hunt people say, well, hunting's not cruel. The RSPCA is not opposed to it. Therefore, it's all hunky-dory. And people campaigns against hunting were always coming up against this kind of, that came from the kind of hunters. So there was a group formed called the RSPCA Reform Group, and the idea of that was we're going to change the policy of the RSPCA. We're going to make the RSPCA anti-hunting. And they kind of, and there was a guy called Brian Seeger, who he was a business guy, but I think he gave up his business and he devoted his life to organising something called the RSPCA Reform Group. And what the idea of the RSPCA Reform Group was to replace, pro-hunt council members with anti-hunt council members. So they recruited massively. The Reform Group, persuaded, a large section of the grassroots of the kind of animal liberation movement, anti-hunt movement, to join the RSPCA.
Yeah, well, I was one of them.
And they got all these loads of people to join. And in the end, they were successful in actually voting in candidates that were like anti-hunt. And the RSPCA changed its policy on hunting and became opposed to hunting. And I think also passed a resolution that nobody that was involved in hunting could be a member of the RSPCA. I think it even kind of went that far. But it kind of used to be crazy at the AGMs, because we used to go along to the RSPCA AGMs, and you could always tell the vegans, because we were the ones in the suit wearing the black plimsolls, you see. But there used to be right ruckus there. Police got called. There was fighting because there was all hunt people in there, and it was like, right, we're up in there. And there was the one that you particularly remember where kind of we even voted at the AGM to no longer have the Queen as the patron, because you remember that. Because I'm not sure I was at that meeting, but you were, weren't you, Roger?
Yeah, well, Beryl Spence from the Spence family was kind of anti-hunting and also involved with the BOAV very strongly, and they kind of recruited me into the thing as this reformist kind of idea. And the first thing we did was vote out the Queen as being the patron. And this was in the morning session. It was down in London, and a big swanky hotel. I can't remember what it was, Dorchester or something.
I used to have the Savoy and all.
And we came back after lunch to be told by the council that they'd reinstated the Queen in the break. So
much for democracy within the RSPCA then.
Yeah, well, funny enough, I mean, there was an incident today. It's in the news that the RSPCA have come out against greyhound racing, and so the person who's in charge of the greyhound racing board, the pro greyhound racing, used to be a member of the RSPCA council apparently, and he's going, oh well, this is typical now. Obviously, the RSPCA have been taken over by all these animal rights. I know, yeah, and you couldn't make it up. And and if they get the greyhounds, they'll move on to the horses.
Well, hopefully,
yeah, which is true, yeah. But it's really weird that even the slightest twinge of radicalism injected into the RSPCA, and all hell breaks loose.
They don't like it. But going back to whether because what happened with the BOAV, there was an organisation called, a strange name for really quite a radical organisation. It was called Coordinating Animal Welfare.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
And they were the group, and there used to be these meetings, core meetings, called them in London, and be 100, 200 people go along to these meetings, and I think the main objective, I think, of coordinating animal welfare, certainly at one time, was to radicalise the BOAV, and to kind of turn it into a more dynamic, progressive.
So all the people that ended up kind of being the officers of the new radicalized BOAV were in the core.
Yes,
situation.
they were, and I think almost all of them were vegan. A lot of vegans involved, and that succeeded. That they once again through the votes of the membership, by getting people to join the RSPCA, cast their vote. They called the kind of old guard, the kind of more sticking.
Yeah, young Turks versus old guard,
and they're like the so-called young Turks. Yeah. But in a sense, it kind of a bit like Animal Farm, because now they're back to being like non-radical again. I mean, they're not called.
But for that little piece of the history of the British movement is interesting, because the grassroots radicalized the BOAV, and then the BOAV, because they were radicalized, were able to assist the grassroots.
Yes.
For example, I remember being called in as a volunteer, and what they did, and this was new at the time. They made these really massive fly posters called "This is Vivisection," and there was a monkey on one of them and a cat on another one, and it had this big slogan, "This is Vivisection," and they were really big. I mean, I don't know what size they are, but really, really huge things. And I remember going in Charing Cross Road, and we bundled them all up and sent them out to just about anybody that we knew anywhere in the country that might put them out. Yeah. And then that's what happened. You know, they went up all over Manchester and Birmingham and Liverpool and stuff.
Yeah, because they had the funds, and suddenly this huge amount of funding was available to grassroots because the BYV had money.
Well, we're back to my point again.
yeah. You see, and just for there was a honeymoon period during which that kind of, and also, I mean, the BYV allowed me to use, when they were at Charing Cross Road, their offices, they allowed me to use a desk in their office and a telephone for the ALF press office.
An entire desk, was it?
An entire desk. And then I had an entire little office. When they moved to
Crane Grove,
Islington, to a bigger premises. Yeah. And they devoted kind of, they gave office space to me for the ALF press office and a number of other grassroots groups. Remember, there's a group called the Fur Action Group, Sea Shepherd as well, like the kind of local Sea Shepherd. Had were given office space.
I didn't know Sea Shepherd was in there. I knew about the
they kind of were artists group called Artists for Animals, and so they kind of allowed these groups to kind of have office space, and I had a little office for the for the press office, and that's how radical they became. I mean, they used a lot of ALF material, a lot of kind of photographs that had been taken on ALF raids, more animal rescue. They were always a little bit wary of the damage side of things, but a lot of the animal rescue images,
they are popular, aren't they, Ronnie?
Yeah, they used those, and they were kind of very supportive. But then it kind of went the other way, and they started kind of.
Well, I was going to ask you though, Ronnie. I mean, like, we kind of know where the impulse was to radicalize it, but how did it just fizzle out?
Well, I think it kind of that they, there was dislike of, although they kind of supported the kind of animal rescue element, I think of the ALF, for instance, they kind of weren't too sure on the damage side of it. And of course, for me, the damage aspect kind of was the most important. That's what hit the vivisection industry and the fur industry and all these these people the hardest, to be honest. But they were never really happy about that. No. And I think there was a kind of attempt to kind of even further radicalize the BYV, to get the BYV in a sense even kind of more supportive of the ALF, and that was resisted. There were people within the BYV that resisted that, and that's kind of when it all unraveled. The press office got ejected. We got thrown out of the BYV.
So it was your fault then, Ronnie, was it?
Well, they said we were planning a coup. Oh. We were going to try and stand people for their executive, who were even more pro ALF, and they were resistant to that, and they sussed out that we were planning this and threw us out.
The thing is, I suppose you could see both sides of this, can't you? Because I do understand the situation, and the way I see it is that they were very supportive of the rescue, as you said. Yeah. I mean, they were pretty supportive of things like Operation Valentine, where there was damage. So, so long as there was rescue involved, if it was just kind of damage on its own. The problem then was that with the ALF, the homes were starting to dry up. And so the damage was increasing while the rescues. But what I'm trying to get at, Ronnie, is that from a kind of respectable organization's point of view, defending the damage in those days would have been a lot harder than the nice pictures of somebody coming out with a beagle, right?
Yeah, I think it was also that sometimes they would condemn stuff that stuff that happened when kind of we felt that wasn't the kind of right approach to that, and that was a kind of bone of contention. Can you say bone of contention? Is that? It depends whose bone it is. Doesn't it,
Hang on a minute. Colleen,
Yeah.
can we say bone of contention? Yeah, don't get up. Yeah. It's a bit like that on
a carrot of contention, should we say? That was a carrot of contention.
Yeah.
Was that? So there was all that kind of involved, and I think the kind of and kind of then they sort of went back to almost what they were before. It's not called the BYV now; it's called Cruelty Free International.
Well, the first thing they did was the strap line of the radicalized BYV was against all animal experiments, and then they changed that to against animal experiments because they wanted to cut out the all bit, didn't they?
So that's wasn't a good sign, but that's kind of the story of.
You think this from Deb is true as well? They conflated damage with violence, which is always a difficult argument that people have, isn't it? That that if
yes. I think they kind of did, and I think even their attitude. I mean, there were certain people around that kind of were kind of, I suppose, unashamedly pro-violent. You had pro-violence. You had groups like the Animal Rights Militia, didn't you? Hunt Retribution Squad.
Do you think that was a mistake, Ronnie, that the ALF didn't keep its distance for them?
Well, we kind of there wasn't a lot kind of we could do. You see, the thing is that I kind of, when I was asked about them, I wasn't going to condemn them. I'm not going to condemn people for wanting to be violent against those that oppress animals. But I would say no. We're not. That isn't us. We don't use those tactics. We've got a policy of not harming, of kind of not harming people. Our focus is just on property and rescuing animals. And I did make that clear. But I wasn't.
Yeah, it's the press though. They're very good at that because they demand for you. Are you going to condemn this?
No, I just say no. I'm not. But then what you do is what you do is kind of deflect it, and I say no. I'm not going to condemn them. What we should be talking about is not whether we condemn or condone what these people do, but we should be talking about what happens to the animals. And I'd always kind of deflect it away from that and talk about something else. I suppose that's what politicians do, isn't it? But that's what I used to do, because it's back to what we talked about the milk spilling. Is everyone's talking all about the milk spilling? Don't talk about the milk spilling. Let's talk about what happens to the animals. That's the important thing. Spending ages vegans going on about that. Well, stop doing that. Get off of Facebook complaining about other activists and do some activism. Go and educate people to go vegan, and then
I can feel another rant coming on, people.
Yeah, there we are. You've been told.
Yes, indeed.
But I mean, and kind of it's sort of interesting. Like the history of the grassroots. Really, you kind of started with Hunt Sab's very grassroots, and then you kind of had the ALF. And you had, the animal liberation leagues for grassroots, weren't there? I mean, obviously the people that kind of.
But what about the future, though? I mean, we're coming up towards the end, but I mean, in terms of the future, it seems to me that the movement is more corporatized now than it's ever been, or you've got individual entrepreneur type persons. So the grassroots are not, but of course they probably operate what you might call the grassroots. And again, you might say that's a bit of a hybrid kind of situation to be in. So what do you think about the future then, Ronnie?
Well, we've got to have, if we are going to achieve animal liberation, we have to educate vastly more people to go vegan, and that, by going vegan, that means actually believing in animal liberation, because that was what veganism involves. And in order to do that, we've got to have a lot more people involved, prepared to do that education, to do that outreach. And that outreach has to take place in a much more localized way, not just in the center of big cities, but like in local areas, suburbs of cities, towns, villages. And that demands someone to instigate it in those areas, someone to instigate it. There's a lot of stuff people can just do like on their own, delivering door dropping leaflets, leaving them in public places. But if you've got a small group of people, you can achieve a lot more. And so it's up to the key to animal liberation is we need these instigators like everywhere to get vegan outreach going, to get other local vegans who otherwise wouldn't be active to say, come on, let's do something, let's kind of organize something around where we live, do a stall, do some door dropping, and that would involve like far more vegans. There's a lot of vegans that kind of wouldn't go on these big events, wouldn't go in the big city, maybe can't do that because of all the things going on in their life, but they can do like smaller things locally, and it's a question of like this. We need this vast mobilization of vegans to get them active, even if it's in really quite a small small way, because that would all add up. And to me that's key, and it's kind of getting the instigators. We need far more. I mean, I've come up with this term now that
the troublemakers.
Yeah, causing trouble for the animal oppressors. Yeah, this is what we kind of need to do. And the best way of causing trouble for the animal oppressors is to educate more people to go vegan. So we starve them of resources. And so we've got, eventually have an administration which will outlaw what these people are doing to animals.
Indeed.
And so we have to.
Speaking of troublemakers, Ronnie,
he is vegan education. And, some things can be educated, direct action can be a form of education. I think what Animal Rebellion have done is kind of, is very, it creates awareness. I think that's, there's a huge educational aspect to that. And I think probably the educational aspect to what they do is more important than anything else, because the idea that you're somehow going to pressurize this government to change, I think is kind of, it's sort of wishful thinking. I would love to see it happen, but you're up against kind of hardline neoliberals that think that everything in the world, including other animals, the only purpose of it is to make profit for someone, and if you're up against people that think that, you're never going to really move them very far. It's the awareness creation of groups like Animal Rebellion. So it's not all, there's a lot of stuff that comes for me within the ambit of education.
I mean, education is definitely key.
Yeah.
Educate. Now, speaking of instigators, though, Ronnie, we've got the boss in the house, so we're going to be careful now.
Yeah, and I think the thing is that if we could get funding for sort of regional organisers that will kind of seed. Will encourage people at a local level, help people at a local level to become instigators. And this is where the people with the money in the movements could actually really put their money to kind of better use. Whoever it is that got the money, whether it's the national organisations, whether it's the kind of, the ones on YouTube that are making a lot of money, like, somehow let's sort out how we can fund people, how we can employ people at kind of regional levels that will go around seeding and instigating, local vegan outreach groups, because that's the key.
I quite like that. I like the devolution from the national thing to regional.
Because that would be because like they, these groups like Nash groups, they produce all these like leaflets, but who's going to deliver them? They're relying on like people in local areas to deliver them. If they haven't got the people in local areas to deliver them, they're not going to be delivered, are they? From their own point of view of self-interest.
Right. Listen now, Ronnie. We're gonna have to come to a close now. We've got the boss in the house. How do you, Sky? And
I'm great. I loved listening to this conversation, because like the idea of leaflets, decentralizing grassroots, I think is what the internet is allowing us to do. Like, people watching those Facebook shows or this show and things like that, when they share, when they like, when they subscribe, that actually does make the algorithm get it to more people. Like if you're watching on Facebook right now and you share it to your Facebook and you've got 1,000 friends on Facebook who aren't vegans, perhaps they're getting more. That's basically like handing out a leaflet to me. It's really
kind of is, except I see what we've done on this show as really aimed at people that are existing vegans. We haven't said a lot about the reasons for veganism. And of course, if any non-vegans are watching, I'd say the best thing you can ever do in your life is go vegan. The amount of suffering and slaughter you'll prevent by doing that is like, is huge. The best thing you could ever do in your life, for the creation of a better world and of a, and to save the planet even.
Right.
Go vegan. So
we're going big at the end. So
we're going big, and that's
we're going big.
on vegans. But I take the vegans.
Ronnie. Sky, will you give us 30 seconds to publicize our panel for next week?
Please.
Yeah. So next week, people, we've got a special show coming up. So we've got a panel, and we're going to be talking about the prevalence, the role, the activism, and the leadership, if you like, the prime movership of women in the movement. And so we have a panel of women from all over the place to do that. We've got about 6 lined up, I think. So that's going to be really good. And Sky, you're away. So
yeah, my show's canceled. So yours is going to be the double the length.
So we can leech into your time.
Yes, indeed.
Yes.
Yes.
Okay.
Take all the time in the world. And thank you for mentioning Patreon today, Roger. I think that was a nice little, if you're out there and you're looking for places to support, Patreon is a great way to do it. And we have a Patreon, patreon.com/vegan, of course, because of course we're vegans. And yeah.
Have you got a good show coming up? Have you, Jack?
I think we have a great show to go. Today we have Nelsie. It's Monday. We have nutritionist Nelsie. She's going to talk about some things that to educate us a little bit on that front. Mondays I like to start the day. I like to start Monday off thinking I'm going to be healthy all week, and then we're gonna
and then just get worse and worse.
And then by Tuesday you have different thoughts, do you?
Yes, exactly. And then right. Yes, and then. I mean, but I'm trying to be healthy up because I'm going to Vegas this weekend, so I'm trying to be a little bit healthier. And then Drake it's Drake's birthday today. Yeah. I know you guys
I hope you're not going to do a load of gambling there, Guy.
Never. No. I lived in Vegas. I can't even. I won't
right.
Even
Well, we're 2 minutes over. You have a good show, Sky, and we shall see you on the other one in a few minutes. So
thank you. And in order to get to that one, if you guys are watching on Facebook, you should be okay. Especially if you're on the Vegan Review. If you want, you can go over to the YouTube. And if you're on Twitch or Twitter, you should be cool to stay where you are.
Brilliant. Okay.